I'm Van Sebastian, here solo this week for our Written on the Edge Season 10, Episode 47 interview. I'll be talking with Troy Ford and discussing his novel Lamb. So let's get to know my guest. Troy Ford's debut novel Lamb released June 3rd and was an Amazon #1 hot new release for LGBTQ plus literary fiction. He overcame a 34-year episode of writer's block to finally write his first novel during COVID lockdown. But Lamb is actually his second, though it was the first to be published. He also runs two newsletters, Ford Knows Books about writing and publishing, and QStack, a community for queer writers on Substack. He, his husband, and their Amstaff Terrier relocated to Spain in 2019, a little gay mecca half an hour down the coast from Barcelona called Sitges. Troy, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm glad to be.
Uh-oh, that just digitized.
Oh, that's
Inter-
strange.
international incident. Okay, let me just back up to the welcome to the show again. Troy, welcome to the
Okay.
show.
Thank you so much. I'm glad to be here.
Yay, you made it. And on a holiday weekend for the US. I know it's not over there necessarily, but thank you for your flexibility in switching a
Yeah.
day for
Happy
me today.
Thanksgiving for sure.
So, a 34-year writer's block. Obviously the passion to write was there. 34 years ago, what was that passion? What caused you to want to just tell a story? Because that's a huge undertaking.
I think it was, it was a combination of both the writing and the spying. So, like many authors, I read Harriet the Spy when I was like 11 or 12 years old, and I just loved it. And I think I even more than the writing aspect was just the, like the observing and the you know the sneaking around maybe a little bit. But I sure played spies, and we had our Lego guns, all that good stuff.
Right.
And so I knew I wanted to do that. I started keeping a journal at around the same time, and I did imagine that I would become a writer, and then I went to a creative writing class at Harvard, actually, during their summer session in Cambridge, and I had a horrible horrible experience.
Oh no.
There was a husband and wife team. I won't say their names. Of course, still remember that, and they were teaching. It was actually science fiction fantasy, and I was really into fantasy. I was a big Lord of the Rings fan, and I knew, yeah, thank you, yeah, and I knew that that's kind of where I wanted to go with it. And so, but interestingly, they were really into science fiction. And so they kind of said from the outset of class, not really into fantasy. So if you want to write that, go ahead. But, and so I was like, but that is what I want to write. And so that's what I'm going to write. And I wrote my first story, and they absolutely trashed it.
Mm.
And not just trashed it, but were almost cruel in their feedback. And this, in class in front of everybody, and I was completely humiliated, and I just didn't, I didn't know what to do with that. Um, and so it kind of set me back. Every time I sat down to write, every story I started sitting down to write since from that point was basically, that I had absorbed their criticism into my inner critic, and just I couldn't get past it. I would get, for years and years. So, like I said, that was when I was 17,
Hmm.
and so from until I was 50 years old, actually. When we moved to Spain, we moved to Barcelona, and within just about 7 months, lockdown happened. And so we were stuck in our apartment. My husband was, working in the bedroom, remotely, and I was not employed. I was going to be teaching English. I had a job to start teaching English lined up, and it completely evaporated after lockdown happened. And so I just was like, I've got to do this. That was the other thing I wanted to try again, after probably over a dozen attempts to start writing a novel, I was like, I'm going to do this again. And in the past, I'd only gotten about 30 or 40 pages into a given story. And then, I would just seize up. But this time, I literally had nothing else to do. So I persisted. And yeah, and so that was how my first novel, actually, Lamb, like I said, like you said, is actually my first published, but actually the second that I've written.
Well, one, that highlights the importance of teachers who are encouraging. I mean, I can't think of a better example
Yeah.
than what you just shared. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
and two, let's talk about Lamb. That's the book that's out in the world, and it did really well on Amazon. Like out the gates, just boom, there it is.
Yeah. And I'll say this. So Substack is kind of it's my only real social media platform at this point. I never really like signed on um, to to all of the other ones so much. So, and when I first started writing on it, it didn't, nobody really thought of it as a social media platform, but it has kind of morphed and it's now sort of this hybrid newsletter, social media platform. But I really found, a niche there and a group of people who, I really connected with, and we helped each other with our own books. And so many of them are now publishing books, some of
Nice.
them by small presses and, some of them independently like me. And so it was Substack, the Substack family that really, really helped me with not only to get over the fright of, publishing something for other people to read, but also, to kind of, it was all pre-orders, I think, from, mostly from Substack people that caused it to go to number one that first week. So that was a huge surprise, and I was absolutely thrilled, of course. But
That's amazing. So
yeah,
if I were to see you at like a signing event and I were to see that cover on the table in front of you and you with your pen and I were to say, what's this story about? What would be your elevator pitch?
Lamb is about two boys who meet in boarding school, California, Central Coast of California, and it's kind of a ritzy boarding school, and they are, as far as they know, the only two queer kids at this all boys school, which is heavily into, sort of alpha male, toxic masculine kind of posturing. And the title character Lamb is this gigantic goofball who is, sort of stands out in any crowd because he's a head taller than anybody else. And so because he's also somewhat meek, he becomes the target of, sort of the school bully. And so his friend, the narrator, D, is telling the story of their friendship in boarding school, and then later when they both end up moving to San Francisco in the 1990s. And it's told in the form of I call it a novel in snapshots because it's told in the form of journal entries, letters that they wrote to each other, conversations. There's some short stories that Lamb, who was an aspiring writer, that he wrote, and so it's episodic. It kind of goes back and forth between the two timelines, and yeah, I won't even give away the opening sort of shocker. It starts on a really sort of a shocking note, and but I'm not going to give that away on this podcast. I usually say, but I kind of want to intrigue people, maybe.
Love it. Well, okay, then I will redirect my question. It's important that you let people know it was in the 90s too, because this happened, and I hate to say pre-Glee, but schools were a very different place before that show.
Oh yeah,
So
yeah,
it's also
yeah,
very important to know that the world that these boys are in, basically.
yeah. I mean, they meet in like I think 1984, and and that's if we look
The
back
year
at
Marty
that,
McFly went
that's
back in time?
oh my gosh, was it? Yeah, and that was not even. 20 years after Stonewall, I mean, it was still very much the gay mu movement was very much still in its infancy. You know, this, and I will say that it is based strongly on, my own life. And uh, in, it was inspired by a friend of mine who was also gay at that school and who died in 2003. And so, yeah, it mirrors my own life, but there's, everything's kind of any elements of truth in it have been, very, changed and run through the fiction mill. So,
Right.
but it was a difficult time
Uh-huh. Very much so.
in the 80s, and then into the 90s even. What we had at that time then was, the AIDS crisis coming up. I was one of those people who already knew about AIDS before I even, started having sex. So I was lucky in that. And so I've called it sort of a post-AIDS um, narrative.
Okay.
Um, but it was also, I mean, it was always there. You know what I mean? I mean,
Right,
for
right.
people coming up in the 80s and 90s and even into the 2000s, until we got PrEP, it was a big deal, And so,
It was, yeah.
uh, so
It kind of governed everything.
yeah, it really did.
All right. So again, sticking with your no spoilers, um, I want to touch on the unnamed narrator who is piecing together clues, it sounds like, sort of Harriet the Spy style, almost. Like you've been informed by your childhood in writing this. What can you tell us about the narrator? Because I'm intrigued by this unnamed concept.
It, yeah, it was kind of fun. I don't know how I hit upon that, except that I really wanted to take the focus off of him. And yet by doing that, I think I knew I was creating sort of this mystery around him.
Yeah.
And I'm giving away a little bit maybe from in terms of what comes next, in that there's going to the next book that I'm currently working on is about D, the initial D, the narrator,
Okay.
and it's told in first person also. So once again, you're not going to find out the name of the narrator, just for fun, Um, but he's, they're a bit different. He's a little bit not, I wouldn't say, working class per se, but Lamb in the first book, he is comes from kind of a wealthy background, and kind of went to boarding school. His father's a diplomat and so forth. And even into his 20s, he has an allowance, that allows him to, not be an especially driven or ambitious person.
Mhm.
Whereas D actually, comes from, a, middle class background, and does have to work really hard, doesn't get anything from his parents, other than, helping him go to college and obviously sending him to private school to begin with. Um, and so, he leaves college, and he immediately gets a job in a stock brokerage firm, and works, very hard at what he's doing. And so, whereas Lamb, from the picture, um, you can see on the wall behind me, the mohawk that Lamb sports that makes him kind of even more stand out in a crowd. Where, as D is, buttoned down, collared, long sleeve shirts and ties to work all the time, cannot dye his hair crazy colors and all that kind of stuff. So,
Right.
so he's kind of like the straight man to Lamb's kind of, freewheeling style.
Nice, nice. So, is there anything about the novel Lamb that you want folks to know that I didn't think to ask?
Uh, I would say that, be prepared for something that is, I haven't put any not spoilers, trigger warnings, on it, but there's a lot of bullying in it. There's drug abuse, there's alcohol abuse, there's definitely some queer sex in it, and there's I don't think any a, s- a certain amount of not violence, but just sort of like really strong imagery around bullying and that kind of thing. So it's people have called it bittersweet. People have called it heartbreaking. It is very strong in its themes, and it's sort of a very pointed sort of indictment to a certain extent about that kind of culture that still exists,
Hmm.
more so back then, perhaps, at least in that particular setting. But anyway, so I think be prepared for something that's character driven and also is always going to make you think and feel some things.
Nice. All right. Are you ready for my get to know you questions?
Sure.
All right, I promise to take it easy on you, but here we go. Can you name
Okay.
a movie that was better than the book?
This is going to be controversial.
Love those. Those are my favorite.
From several different directions. Harry Potter.
Really?
Harry Potter, I thought was a wonderful film series, and I did read the books, and I just felt like J.K. Rowling. I mean, let's not even get into the transphobia and all that kind of stuff.
Hmm.
But I just didn't think she was an especially good writer. And I thought that the books were often very bloated and, had a lot of extraneous things that really didn't need to be there. That, of course, in a movie format, um, is trimmed down and turned into, something that's much more of a spectacle. And I just kind of feel like the fantasy elements were so much better realized in movie form than in book form. So yeah, and there were
Nice.
so many great adult actors, especially that really made it a charming thing, as opposed to the books by she who must not be named.
Right. And, you know, uh, as problematic as she is as an author, when the books came out, nobody realized this about her. So I think it's fair because they affected the culture in a very huge way. I mean, we can't ignore that they exist. I absolutely do not agree with her personal viewpoints on anything.
No, no, exactly.
All right. Well, with which fictional character would you most like to be friends?
This is an odd one. There were a couple kind of real obvious ones I wanted to pick, but in the end, the next one after the most obvious choices, um, Aunt Betsy Trotwood in David Copperfield. She was
Oh.
so endearing, and I read David Copperfield for the first time not that long ago, actually, and it was so good. And she was such an endearing character. I just thought, just she initially seemed like kind of a bit of a monster,
Hmm.
and just abandoned him, at the beginning when he was first born or whatever. But then when he really needs her, she comes through, and I just thought, wouldn't it be great to have a rich old aunt who just loves you to death and wants to wants to see you do well in the world? I mean, we could all do something like that, right?
Right.
An anti-mame. There's another one, anti-mame.
Rosalind Russell's
Oh,
behind
there
you.
you go. There you go. Yeah. So a rich old aunt.
Nice. Well, what is the most fascinating fact that you know?
Um, did you know that in the history of the world, all of the gold ever mined would fit into 4 Olympic swimming pools?
I did not.
I had to look it up. I thought it was two. It's actually four. And they're
Oh,
not that deep. Olympic swimming pools are only 6 feet deep. They're not like, they don't have the
they're
deep end for
it's like an
diving or
inline
whatever like
pool,
that.
yeah.
Right. Yeah. So, and I just thought, wow, so much has been, I mean, sure, if you had it all collected in one place, it would be a lot, you know what I mean? But I
Hmm.
mean, in the history of the world, you know what I mean? To think that all of that activity has only yielded, 4 swimming pools worth.
Wow, so much bloodshed for so little.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah, for real.
All right. Well, what was your favorite subject in school?
So my favorite subject, and the one that I ended up majoring in at UC Berkeley, was rhetoric,
Really?
which was such an odd choice. I had never even heard of rhetoric really until I was freshman year. I could not get into any of the English classes. They were all full, and it was a requirement, English 1A, 1B. Well, a friend told me, well, try rhetoric. It fulfills the requirement. And and there's a whole, they have a whole PhD program in rhetoric, and I was just like, okay, why not,
Hmm.
and so I enrolled, and I just loved it. I loved the analysis. So, modern rhetoric is not as much about, speaking, and and rhetoric gets a bad name, I think, because people think of it as, manipulating, viewpoints and so forth, which there's that as well. But a lot of it is analyzing, different subjects, and that's what I loved about the program. Was you would look at the rhetoric of philosophy, or the rhetoric of women's film,
Hmm.
or the rhetoric of autobiography, for example. And absolutely everything that we did in classes was write papers. There were no tests ever, which suited me great, and I kind of always thought of rhetoric as the writing major, as opposed to
Nice.
the reading major of English. So, and
Right.
they didn't have a creative writing program at UC Berkeley. So that was it.
Nice. That's really cool.
Yeah.
Well, before making a telephone call, do you rehearse what you're going to say?
I avoid telephone calls at all costs.
Yay for texting, right?
Yeah, texting, and also to here in Spain, I haven't learned Spanish.
Oh no.
So yeah, it's a long story. But yeah, so it's always a fraught prospect to, imagine having to call someone. So
Fair.
texting, please. Text, please.
Well, and like your first 5 years in a new place, you couldn't meet the neighbors and start to learn the language because you were trapped in your house.
Well, yeah, for the first 2 years, maybe. Yeah, exactly. So, and I did start taking Spanish, and then it was immediately locked down, literally. I took a month of Spanish, and then I couldn't keep going back to that particular class. So, my husband speaks Italian fluent. He is Italian. He was born in Italy, so Italian was his first language. He
Hmm.
picked up Spanish in no time. He's a complete crutch for me, but so there you go.
Yay for
No,
husbands.
no phone calls.
All right. Well, which current event or causes are you passionate about?
I am actually very, very concerned about the climate crisis, and I mean there are so many different things, wars and famines and all this kind of stuff. But I do believe that the climate crisis is going to just escalate. I'm looking at people in coastal cities, in underdeveloped countries. There's going to be mass migration of peoples, under duress, between across borders, and water. I honestly believe water wars are coming, and I just think it's overall it's one of the biggest challenges humanity will ever face. So
Hmm.
very concerned about that for sure.
Agreed. Well, if you could visit anywhere in the world, where would that be?
Um, I would I would love to go. I would love, like a week or two, unsupervised, just by myself in the Bodleian Library at Oxford. I think,
Unsupervised is the best word there.
yeah. I think that would be an amazing experience, sort of, yeah,
Hmm.
definitely.
Yep.
Mind blowing.
Agreed. Agreed. Well, who, if anyone, was your first celebrity crush?
Aquaman.
Really?
The the cartoon Aquaman.
Like from the Justice League, like the Justice Friends, that era?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
I can see that.
Yeah, no, he was hot.
Love it. Well, final question. What's your personal favorite recipe that you make, and are you willing to share?
Yes, and it's actually really, really simple. So my mom used to make these cookies called jam thumbprints. Have you ever seen them?
I think
Ever
so, yeah.
had those? You know, they're like just a little shortbread cookie with jam. You cook it and you stick the thumbprint in it, and then you put the jam in afterwards. But my innovation was to make them as peanut butter cookies.
Yeah.
It's basically the same consistency of dough, and if you make it the same way with the thumbprint and then you put jam, it's a peanut butter and jam thumbprint. And it's
Nice.
so delicious.
That sounds like a holiday treat I'll have to make for the kids that are
Yeah,
coming.
you should try. You should try.
That sounds fantastic.
Yeah,
Well, you made it through my list. Bravo.
fantastic. Thank you.
So, what's up next for you? And you already teased a book too. What other news do you have?
Yeah, so book two is going to be the story of Dee in middle age, actually, and it's going to have some sort of those midlife issues that we all face. And then there is going to be a third book, actually. It's going to be again, I can't give too much. I'm trying not to give too much away in this
Well,
interview, but
here's the thing. Future books, we don't hold you to it. You're just giving people a teaser. We aren't going to
yeah,
hold you to
that's true.
anything.
But even describing what the book is going to be about, I'm trying to avoid spoilers of the first book or whatever. So it's going to be also about Lamb. It's going to take the focus back to Lamb, and it's going to look a little bit more closely at a period of his life that I'm hoping is going to sort of balance out the heartbreak of the first novel and become something a little bit more. Eh, um, what's the word? Redemptive, let's say.
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
will book three wrap the series, or do you have more planned for people in this world?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. I've called it the Tales of the City of Generation X,
Nice.
and I've thought about like even the first book I wrote, which I haven't published yet, but I've thought about how I could possibly tie it into, this world that I've created, and so it's a thought. There could be other books, I suppose. Yeah, definitely.
Nice. Love it. All right. Well, do you have any final words of wisdom?
Um, hmm. So the thing I've been working on lately is I've gone back to a habit that I started that got me through that first book during lockdown, and it's a habit of writing for 10 minutes a day.
Nice.
10 minutes because I have such a terrible time with procrastination, so just sitting down for 10 minutes turns into 20, turns into 30, turns into an hour. If it doesn't, if you're done after 10 minutes, you can just walk away. But it really did help me, and it's helping me again this time around as well.
Love it.
So yeah,
Yeah, that is excellent, excellent advice for anyone who wants to write. And I say that as someone who gets an hour a day in the middle of my day job, where I do something similar. I fill pages and pages and pages for my free hour a day.
that's fantastic
So, yes,
for sure.
I wholly endorse this plan. All right, Troy, where is the best place online for people to follow what you're doing, catch up with you, maybe even reach out to you if you're on the social medias? Which one is best?
The absolute best one would be Ford Knows Books on Substack. Actually, the URL is uh, troyford.substack.com. And then I have my own personal website, which is troyfordauthor.com.
And,
So
and should we tell people a bit about both of the um, newsletters that you run?
yeah, Ford Knows Books. The focus on that is kind of is books basically, and I have a couple of series that I write regularly, or that I actually have guest writers as well. There's the Books We Love Club, my own little book club, and that is for books that people return to again and again. So no beach reads, no latest bestseller or whatever. It's the ones that you go back to over and over and you've reread, not necessarily since childhood, but it's one of your desert island books, basically, if you,
Right.
had to pick, three books to take with you. And then the other series I write regularly every month is The Road to Published. And so that kind of tells about, about everything from, from childhood and wanting to write, and then how I got, through writer's block and all of the steps to self-publishing my first book. And now we're continuing that on. And, eventually it's possible I might have, uh, agent querying and, publishers, small press, or, big five, or who knows what. It's an open-ended question at this point.
Love it. All right. Well, folks, if you want to springboard into any of that, actually starting at troyfordauthor.com will get you to those, as well as his social media links and all of the information you would possibly want to know about Mr. Troy Ford.
Thank you so much.
All right, I'd like to extend a huge thank you to my guest, Troy. Thank you so much for joining me today. I wish you the best. Please come back when book 2 is ready and tell me about it, because I want to.
Oh, I would love to.
I want to learn how the series is progressing.
I would absolutely love to. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Folks, we at Written on the Edge are proud to introduce you to new media by queer content creators. If you enjoy learning about new artists or hearing our thoughts on entertainment media, please like and subscribe so you get the alerts for new episodes. Our show is produced by Rogue Ravens Media. For our disclaimers, links to social media, our listen stations, or to sign up as a guest, visit www.roguepodcast.com. See you next week for your queer media fix. Cut the record.
What's that? Closing time. The bums rush in melody, dear.